we go.
We're live, Chairman.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Alan Law. I'm the Chairman of Overview and Scrutiny Management Commission. Members of the Commission present this evening are Councillors Adrian Abbs, my newly elected Vice Chairman, Councillor Jeff Brooks, Councillor James Cole, Councillors Tony Linden, Councillor Steve Masters, Councillor Claire Rolls, and we're expecting Councillor B. Oloko, but he hasn't shown up yet. Other members in attendance are Councillors Lynn Doherty, the leader of the council, Graham Bridgman, and Tom Marino. Those three are coming in by Zoom. Council officers present to advise and support the meeting tonight are Nigel Lynn, the Chief Executive, Sue Halliwell, the Executive Director of Place. Do I see Sue?
No,
No, not here yet. I don't see Joseph either.
No.
Joseph Holmes. Are they supposed to be here in presence?
they're not attending. So.
Yeah.
Joseph Holmes sent apologies.
He sent apologies, I see. Okay. And I've got Sarah Clark, who's strategic director, Paula Goodwin, who's the service lead in HR, and Caroline Richardson, who's the service manager of the JEPU. We're also expecting, although I believe he's held up in traffic, which is probably his own fault, Superintendent Zahiz Aziz from Thames Valley Police. So as he was on as the first real item tonight, we may have to jiggle the agenda just a little bit. Gordon Oliver to my left is the clerk for the meeting, and the meeting is being live streamed by YouTube, and Thomas Dunn is the Zoom host. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefits of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the meeting room. The meeting has been live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are also able to follow proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they switch off their microphones when invited, switch on their microphones when invited to speak directly into them, and to switch them off again when they're finished. And I also make sure and ask that all mobile phones in the room are turned off or put on silent. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, it will be for rail, so we must leave the building immediately by the emergency exit. The assembly point is at the Dolphin Car Park, and if the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from officers. We will adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. Do members have any questions about the way in which this meeting will be conducted before we proceed? No, thank you very much. Now, first item is apologies. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Tony Vickers and from Joseph Holmes.
Thank you. Item number 2, we have 2 sets of minutes.
Sorry, Chairman, we also have apologies from the substitutes on the Lib Dem side, Owen Jeffrey and Lee Dillon.
Indeed, thank you very much. So item 2, the minutes, we've got 2 sets of minutes. The first one's the minutes of the last meeting on Tuesday, the 22nd of March. Any 3 or 4 pages, 5, 6 pages of this. I've gone through it. It looked fine to me, but anybody, any comments? If not, could I have a proposer, please, to take these? And I've got a proposer. I've got Councillor Marsh, seconded Councillor Linden. Councillor Masters. Yeah. Beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. That's a Freudian slip. Sorry about that. Could we, just by show of hands, please accept the minutes? That's all unanimous. Thank you very much. And the other set of minutes was the formal meeting to elect chairman and vice chairman, which took place on Tuesday, the 10th of May. I take it that these are okay to be signed. Show of hands, please. Yeah, unanimous again. Fine. I will sign those just immediately after the meeting. Right. Members are asked to note the item 3, actions from previous minutes. Members are asked to note the progress in relation to these items. There's an update for item 58. The chairman of the Kennet and Avon Canal Trust has been approached regarding resuming meetings of the Canal Partnership, and we've requested a copy of the terms of reference. Members, any on this item, which is in page, I can find it, page 17, do we have any comments, questions? No. I've reviewed it and everything looks hunky-dory to me. So with if there's no point of clarification or anything, I will move that we accept those actions. And then I will move on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Do anybody have a declaration of interest with regards to tonight's meeting and agenda? No, we have no declarations of interest. Okay. And then move to item 5, which is petitions. Gordon, are there any petitions that have been received in advance of the meeting?
No, Chairman, no petitions have been received.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 6 is we're sitting now as the Crime and Disorder Committee, but as the superintendent hasn't yet arrived, can I, with your agreement, move on to item 7? Okay. On item 7, I'd like to invite Paula Goodwin, head of HR, to present her report. Now, this report is a little bit different from what I think I and the rest of you expected to see. We originally asked for a report simply on a review of the appraisal system and all that goes with it. And we've got something slightly different to that, but related. So we'll really come back to that introductory point later on. Paula, if you would like to lead us off, please.
Hi, okay, so yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I started at the council in July last year, so I think I've met the majority of you. In terms of the paper, I just want to give a brief overview in relation to, I suppose, a bit of my time at West Berkshire and how that impacts on HR, because this is important in terms of our journey as a HR team to support the council and its employees going forward. So we have undertaken a peer review of HR through the LGA recently. In fact, we had feedback today in relation to that peer review, which is very positive. But clearly there is a journey to go on in relation to HR and the activity that needs to support the organisation to meet its customer care standards going forward. So, but very positive in terms of feedback, and of course we'll feed that back through members at a later point when we've got that information. The other thing is that we've got a very clear workforce strategy in relation to HR that was updated in 2021, went through Personnel Committee in terms of its review. It covers a period 2019 to 2023, so we'll be up for review next year, which gives us time to really have a look at what we've delivered this year and what we want to deliver in the future. But we have made good headway in relation to our workforce strategy, and we have delivered quite a lot already in relation to some of the training that we've done and reviewed in relation to. We've just delivered a training needs analysis, and we're about to release a new corporate training programme on the basis of information provided by staff and managers. We will be looking at delivering things like leadership and management development and aspiring managers programmes this year. We will also be looking at improving on our coaching and mentoring framework, which we embedded last year in relation to a pilot that we introduced. And we will be looking at external methods to support that framework as well as internal. We've got a lot of recruitment activity projects that we will be undertaking over the next 12 months. And of course, we are also looking at how much and what we deliver in relation to Personnel Committee data. So in my time, we have started to produce more data for Personnel Committee to review, and we've committed to delivering that every 6 months. And we've just updated a new report that will come to Personnel Committee in July this year when it's been through the internal cycle. So there's lots of activity going on in HR, and part of the workforce strategy was an action to review our competency framework and also to review our performance management standards. And of course, appraisals fall into that particular category. So we've been working with an external consultant that's helped us put together a behaviour framework from consultation with our employees and with our senior managers. It's in its final drafting stage, and then we'll need to go out to trade unions to be consulted on before it's finally ready to be implemented, which hopefully will be in the next month or so. And this is important in relation to the appraisal process, because at the moment what we have in the appraisal process is a competency framework, and that new behaviour framework will replace that competency framework. There is then the plan, or a plan, to review all of our performance management arrangements around the behaviour framework. So at the moment we have competencies within the appraisal, but of course we want to do more than that. So we want to look at things like our induction, our probation, our recruitment, and how that fits in with the behaviour standards that we would expect of our employees going forward. So there's a much bigger piece of work around looking at our processes and procedures, and of course using digital, how our systems can support us better to ensure that we're getting appropriate data to make sure that things are happening in the way that we want to. So in terms of the appraisal process, it hasn't changed in the last 12 months, certainly in my time in the organisation, but there are plans to review that going forward. And of course, the behaviour framework is the first step in doing that. We have, however, made lots of headway in terms of encouraging staff to make sure that they're having their appraisals and having their one-to-ones. So we've got a new one-to-one template, some new guidance for one-to-ones for managers, and the feedback has been very positive in relation to those conversations, and all of that is connected to our well-being. And we've got a new wellbeing officer that started in March this year, who has lots of ideas about things that can happen to support our wellbeing. But in terms of our appraisal process and our targets, so we have a 90% KPI for delivery against appraisals. In Q1 in 2021, we had a 74.9% return for appraisals. And in Q4, it's gone up to 87.17. So we are moving in the right direction in terms of having those appraisals for our managers and employees. And of course, that will continue to develop, and we are doing more training. We are looking at having more conversations about appraisals and supporting managers to have those conversations. And of course, it will be connected to our training programme as well, and looking at how to give and receive feedback in a positive way, and having difficult conversations. So there will be more in our training programme to support our managers going forward. We do have some training, some e-learning training, but we think it probably could do with a bit more development going forward. So in relation to the paper that you've got in front of you, it is connected to the behaviour framework, and there is going to be a complete review of our appraisal process, which I think is where probably the conversation came from for this particular committee. So there will be a review. Don't know what that's going to look like yet. We're still on that journey in terms of what that might look like. But of course, for now, we are successfully completing appraisals and one-to-ones with our staff, and performance is good in the organisation. Feedback from the staff survey is positive. So I think there are lots of positives that we can take out of everything that we're doing in relation to HR and employees at this moment in time. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. I've got several hands up, and I've also Jeff. Let me take them in order if you don't mind. First, Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Chairman. At the February Personnel Committee meeting, we were given an update on HR activity, Q1, 2, 3. Told us this framework was being developed, and we asked for a paper on appraisals for the next meeting. We also noted there was not a lot in that on objectives. What there was a table of real data of appraisals, actually done in 18 months to the 7th of February. I was surprised not to see that as the basis of this paper, what has happened in the past compared to where we're going now. Could that not have been put in? There were, after all, some considerable differences between the services. I, for one, would like to know if that has changed.
So in terms of the data, and unfortunately because of the timings, so the report that was written for Personnel Committee obviously has Q3, and actually what you will get next time is Q4, so you'll get the whole year. So that information will go to Personnel Committee, because we did agree at Personnel Committee you would get an update, a regular update on appraisal data. Appraisal data is also now circulated monthly for operations board, so information is provided in relation to that appraisal data. I wasn't under the impression it was required for this particular meeting, hence the reason that data is not in this report. But there is data available that members have had access to.
I see.
Okay.
That's the way it is. Well, I have one or two other things, but why not let somebody else participate?
Okay, Councillor Masters. Go ahead. I'll come to Councillor Brooks next.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Just a couple of general questions. In terms of, you talked about the percentages of one-to-ones and appraisals returns. Is there any particular area that is falling short compared to other areas of the council that need, and if so, what support are you giving those department heads and team leaders, etc.? And also, in terms of training, where does the aspirant management training kind of kick in the grades? You know, so people who are very junior, but clearly if you see potential, or their team leaders see potential, is it possible for people quite junior to tap into and move forward with potential careers through the council? Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. So I'll take the data question first. So in terms of the different directorates, there's not a massive amount of difference. People has the lowest score with 83.62 in Q4, place 90.94, and resources 92.54. So obviously the 87.17 is averaged out. So it's not massive amounts of difference. In terms of support for those people that require that support, obviously they can come to HR and have a conversation if they feel they want some help. We've revamped our guidance in relation to one-to-ones, and we will be reviewing our appraisal, like I say, training, but also coaching to encourage managers to have those better conversations as part of that appraisal process. So there's still a journey to go on. It's quite early days in terms of that being revamped. So the one-to-one form was only rolled out about probably 4 weeks ago, and we asked for feedback as part of that process. So we rolled it out. We want people to feedback and say, does it work effectively? And then we will improve the quality of those, not just the forms, but the guidance that goes with it and anything else that comes out of that. And of course, like I say, we've done a training needs analysis, and as part of that, people have asked for specific training, if you like, in relation to having conversations. So we'll also look at rolling that out over the next year. So this corporate training program. Second question. What was the second question?
What point in the
yeah.
the hierarchy of
Managers.
so
Yeah.
aspirant and where you've got talent that's coming through, and there's clearly you'll have members of staff who are particularly ambitious, and where does that kick in, and where can they access that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, again, we haven't designed that program yet. So there's still, once we've got the behaviour framework agreed, there will be a period of designing the program for leadership, management development, and then the aspiring managers program. But it is intended that that will start to be rolled out this year. In terms of targeting who, then of course we would like managers to put forward names of people that they perceive to be those aspiring managers, and of course employees can put themselves forward as well. PDPs are part of an appraisal process, so having your own personal development plan is really important, and making sure that you're having that conversation with your line manager about your aspirations within the organisation. And of course, looking at retention, we want to make sure that we retain people as much as possible. And more people aren't as concerned about money. Yes, money is important to people, but actually people's career and development is really important. And it isn't all about training. Sometimes it's about people moving into different teams, getting opportunities to be seconded, working on projects, etc. So development can have many different forms. It isn't always about formal training. But of course, we want to grow our own. We want to retain our staff. And that will be our target audience to ensure that we're doing that. We want to look at graduate schemes. We want to look at interns. There's lots of things that we want to do, but it is about having the time and the resources in HR to do that. And of course, it has to be done in an order. You can't do it randomly, otherwise it doesn't connect together. So hence the reason, behaviour framework first, and then all those other things that come out of the back of that at the end of the year. And the plan for the workforce strategy is quite ambitious in terms of what 1 year left on that plan. There's a lot to deliver. So I think there's some conversations to be had about what realistically we can deliver and what's important to the organisation in terms of priorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a few things I'd like to draw attention to, and I'll start with a bit of a plaudit, really, because if you're going from 74.9% to 87.17%, I think you said, that's a very good direction of travel.
I'd have thought you'd want to get up to 95, 96%, to be honest with you, so that the exceptions are very much not the rule. But well done, you're moving up in the right direction. You're not starting from scratch. You talk about lots of work programs as if these things haven't been going on in the past. The organisation has been around a long time and appraisals have been going a long time, learning development, PDPs, all of these things happen. So what you're telling us, I think, is you're reviewing these. And there's quite a lot of work to do to review them. But while you're reviewing them and bringing in new things, business as usual is still getting on with appraisals to staff. And what I'd like to have seen is something of a flow chart within this, a process flow of how the appraisals per department are taken up, how they feed into PDPs, how the PDP feeds into training, peer-to-peer learning. And what you're doing, I think, you're hanging it around something called a behaviours framework. And I looked at that, and I wouldn't mind some councillors signing up to that, to be fair, some of it being enshrined in our code of conduct. But, you know, when you talk about behaviours, that's very important, but you can't omit performance. You said this is replacing performance and competency frameworks. Well, it mustn't replace them. It must augment them. And I'm not sure I'm seeing it augmenting them. And your wording is about this replaces them, but there is a performance dynamic and a competency dynamic within an appraisal that is vital to pick up. And you can have people working with good behaviours. That's important. I'm nearly finished, Chairman. And respect. And that's very important. But also you want to know that their performance is suitable. And are we capturing that within this new framework of yours? Because that's my question, Chairman. I'm sorry I've taken a long time to get there, but I'm just not seeing a full picture here.
Paula?
Yeah, so the intention is that behaviour framework will replace the competency framework. So if you had a copy of the appraisal form, you have objective setting, then you have the competency framework, and then you have a performance development plan. So there is not a proposal to change having SMART objectives for individuals. That will continue. What will change, though, is the behaviour framework will replace the competency framework that's in there. So when you talk about performance management, we still need people to deliver, but it's also how you deliver. It's not just the ticking the box and delivering a particular objective. It's how you do that in the best way possible. So we want people to show excellent customer care, and we will support people to do that. And that is likely to come out of part of that behaviour framework. There will also still be specific competencies for specific roles. So when you talk about social workers, for example, they will keep their professional competency arrangements in place. They will not be taken away. Same for lawyers, HR professionals, etc. We have our own competencies that relate to our job roles. They will still exist, but they will be measured in a different way. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I would really like to see it in a schematic. I'd like to see how all these things flow, both right through the appraisal process and then link off to other aspects, development, learning. I think a picture tells 1,000 words, and I'm not seeing it here. But well done. It's moving in the right direction, but I think it could be a little bit easier to see. And finally, I mean, career paths are so important as well. And in some organisations, I've even put them up as schematics on the wall. Here's your career path. If you achieve those competencies, those behaviours, and that training, you can aspire to the next lane, the next career. You know, make it visual, make it open, make it so people can see how they can do well and progress. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman, I would like to follow, which was my third point, with what Councillor Brooks has said in terms of behaviours. And I think it is very important, and on this report, on example of behaviour framework, and that our employees feel they're working for a good organisation. There has been some views in terms of planning that some members' language hasn't been appropriate at meetings and speaking to officers. And again, I stress the fact with Councillor Brooks in terms of code of conduct, we've got to be very careful how we get things over at various levels of councillors. And I think that is important in terms of educating councillors. I'm not saying any more about that. The other two bits were really on page 49. In terms of managing networks, we have had a problem way into some time ago that we have been fairly siloed, and there are a variety of directorates that needed to deal with. So we've got some people who are no longer employed by the council, where we had some concerns in terms of protection in children's services, but they're involved in licensing. So hopefully these things are being sorted out. It's trying to be a one organisation capability, and that's useful to come to. The other thing was employees appraisal in another place. And I know COVID has been a delay. Are we completing a decent percentage of appraisals with our staff on an annual basis? Because I know there are time pressures there. I'd just like to have an answer on that, please, Paula.
Okay, so I'll take the second question first because it's about data. So the percentages that I quoted are the returns. So the 87.17 is the appraisal return rate, if you like. So that's people that have had an appraisal in the last 15 months. So it is happening in relation to COVID. Yes, it probably has been relaxed because people have had other priorities. And of course, objectives have changed as a result of COVID, because priorities for the organisation has changed, and not just COVID, but things like Afghanistan and obviously now Ukraine. People's direction of travel change, and therefore their appraisal needs to be reviewed to reflect that flexibility. So the data says that we've got a good percentage return. People are having appraisals, people are having one-to-ones, and we will continue to encourage and support that measure across the organisation. In terms of manager networks, so manager networks is actually an action within the workforce strategy to look at developing better manager networks across the organisation. And I could probably cross-reference that with outcomes of the staff survey. So there was some conversations about engagement and internal comms and how that works more effectively across the organisation. So we will be looking at how we improve our internal communications and engagement within the organisation, because that helps manager networks. But, and I can say this from sitting in resources where we have lots of opportunities to mix with other managers. So in resources, we have on conferences, and that's something that I'm sure will be encouraged to other people to participate in other parts of the organisation. So that is generally the senior management team or the senior managers right down to kind of third tier managers in the organisation. There's lots of updates. There's lots of opportunities to get involved in projects as well. So kind of communicating with each other, having that opportunity to have those conversations. There's more focus groups going on in the organisation in relation to specific areas. So there's more opportunity for people to get involved in those particular focus groups and conversations. So staff survey, return to the office, that kind of thing. So there, we are creating networks for managers to have those conversations, and aspirationally looking at things like networks for women who aspire to be managers or leaders, etc., that kind of thing. So there will be further opportunities going forward, but we obviously, again, trying to create those as obviously we come out of COVID in relation to, it's gone, the COVID pandemic has gone, but it's trying to recreate that now in a hybrid fashion rather than people being at home or people being in the office. So it's a different arrangement, but it's in the workforce strategy. Sorry, long answer, but there's kind of lots going on at the minute.
Thank you. We have four more hands up. First one's Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was particularly interested in 5.1 of the report, which says current WC values are as follows. Integrity, we act with integrity, ensuring all decisions are lawful, transparent and impartial. And you go on to reference fairness. We'll always treat everyone fairly. Seems to me that that's referencing the Nolan Principles largely, and officers are governed by the Nolan Principles just as members are. I was surprised that there was no reference whatsoever, as far as I could see in this document, to the Nolan Principles and the other Nolan Principles that officers are governed by, just as we are. I wondered if you could comment on that. Thank you.
It's something actually that was discussed as part of the behaviour framework. Because obviously we've been talking to lots of different groups and public health, etc. So it is something that will come out of the behaviour framework rather than the values. Those are organisational values that were agreed, and obviously we can't change at this moment in time. But the behaviour framework, there has been discussion about the Nolan principles, and also from a wellbeing perspective, those conversations have taken place. So it's not, it will be in that future behaviour framework, which obviously is not finished yet.
So just to clarify, that will be a fundamental, essential part of the framework, I imagine, because they are the fundamental sort of governing pieces of our code. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously where they relate to specific parts of the organisation, then that will continue. That won't change, because, like I say, we're not moving away from specific competencies and standards of practice in certain areas, but we have reflected on that as part of the behaviour framework. I'm not saying it will be based on the Nolan principle. It will take account of that consideration, as it will with things like inclusivity. And we've had conversations with our EDI forums, etc. So there's lots of things being considered as part of that behaviour framework.
Sorry, can I just make one other point? And in our constitution, it tends to kind of labour the Nolan principles under the code of conduct for members. Actually, there's very little reference to officers being governed by the Nolan principles as well. So I think it's important that we do actually reference them specifically in our behaviour and competency frameworks, because that is slightly, I believe, lacking in the constitution. So something I think would be good to have. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Abs.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, mine's quite a simple one, Paula, really. You touched on it a little bit there, but I just want to make sure I'm clear in my head. Obviously, people are more engaged with appraisals. That's great. I'm really trying to understand where the change came from. Is it? I think you started to mention about virtual appraisals. Is that where the changes come from, that you're able to do more and more of this rather than face to face online or something like that?
Can I just ask, which change are you referring to? The behaviour.
Well, the engagement with appraisals that you're referring to. Now more people are engaged, so
Okay.
or what the return rate is higher. Sorry, so why are they more engaged?
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think yes, absolutely, more people coming back into the office. But I think hybrid. I mean, appraisals have not stopped as a result of COVID. It has not impacted greatly. Yes, the rates have increased, and don't forget that for probationers, their objectives are set as part of the probation period. So new employees obviously have their objectives set slightly differently. The rates have gone up because of the fact we are encouraging people to have those conversations now, and doing it hybridly. And that's why we are producing things like one-to-one templates that are slightly different to what was the original template, putting guidance in place, offering managers support in having those conversations. And obviously coming back to the office helps, using your house, using other facilities, doing things face to face. So we are using the opportunity for people coming back into the office to have those conversations, but that does not stop people having appraisals, if you like.
Yeah, I guess I got slightly confused there. So is the gain because people are back in the office, or is the gain because you've moved to a hybrid model?
I think the gain is because we've been encouraging people to have those conversations.
So neither.
So it's a marketing.
Fair enough.
Is the best way I can say that we've been encouraging people to do it and leading by example.
Yeah, I think that's a very diplomatic way, encouraging people to do it. I think you've got to there's no doubt that the change in the numbers have reflected the change in senior management. So things come from the top.
Where I was going with this, Chair, is that, obviously we have Time Lord 2 coming down the pipe, and we're going to have more and more of this embedded of working remotely. So I'm just trying to say if that's a gain for us or if that's a barrier for us.
Okay. I've got the Chief Executive's got his hand up. I think he wants to finally address some of that.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this leads aptly into what Councillor Abs was saying and what Councillor Brooks was saying earlier on, really, in relation to there has been more emphasis with the corporate leadership team on appraisals taking place. I don't think the percentage was high enough late autumn. Paula and her team have been helping individual managers to make sure that happens as well. So appraisals are of high importance to me, and in terms of the role going forward, obviously this is part of my direct responsibility in making sure that staff are aptly trained, appraised, and have plans going forward. So that's certainly a discussion that I've been having with the executive to make sure that we're on top of that. And that's why the operations board have that data that Paula mentioned on a regular basis as well, to make sure we continue to be on top of it. I think also as part of that, it's not only the encouragement, which is the word I think Paula used, but also that the system we currently have is a bit cumbersome. And I suspect coming out of this, we'll have a simpler system in the future that when Paula comes back to what we're going to do with appraisals. And a lot of managers had the appraisal had taken place, but they hadn't uploaded the data because of the system as well. And I think part of that encouragement was about making sure that data was loaded on, which was part of that. I just also want to mention the employee attitude survey, and Paula mentioned earlier that there's been a lot of discussion with staff. So we've had focus groups that have come out of the employee attitude survey, and the leader and I attended all of those focus groups, and therefore we heard from a lot of staff from across the across all areas of the council, and the need for appraisals and staff wanting to have those appraisals and more one-to-one meetings came out of that, and that's been emphasised, and that's within the action plan going forward as well. So I do hope that the emphasis is put on more one-to-ones, more regular meetings, so that appraisals are part of that process. They're not just a once a year get together, they are probably the 12th meeting of the situation going forward. Certainly from a corporate leadership point of view, we are pushing that and making sure that's an important part of our communication with staff and coming back up from staff as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. I come back, Councillor Cole, you've got your hand up still. And then I'll come back to Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman.
Now I'll wrap it
Can we
up.
go back to 5.1, where you make what looks like an exceedingly honest comment? Integrity, customer focus, fairness. It's clear these values are not promoted through current induction and onboarding arrangements, and more could be done, so on. I was surprised to see that, I have to admit. It's a very straightforward statement. What has been happening then when we've been taking staff on?
So in terms of recruitment activity, obviously staff are not, new potential staff are not measured against those values at this moment in time. In terms of appraisals, because the values are not linked to the competencies that are currently within the appraisal process, then staff are appraised against objectives which are set each year, so SMART objectives that are set, and then measured against the competencies that are currently within that appraisal. They do not connect to the values. So the new behaviour framework has specifically been drafted so that it connects, the themes of the behaviour framework will connect to the values of the organisation. So
all the way
that's
through.
The link, yeah. So Councillor Brooks mentioned about having something more pictorial, and that would be the intention going forward, that specifies the employee journey, that connects all of this together and connects it to the organisational values and the organisational objectives as well. So it's that golden thread. How does it all connect together? How do we know as an employee that we're working towards that same aim in the organisation? That's what that new appraisal process will do, but it's not there yet. It's going to take a bit of time to review it and get that drafted.
Thank you.
Finally, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. I'm encouraged by what Paula has just said. Can I come back to the hybrid working, please? Naturally, in this age where people are working remotely, Zoom is a tool, Teams, whatever we use, to be able to undertake a form of appraisal, Chairman. But I personally have appraised a lot of people, and in an appraisal, a good one, I have been able to spot body language, discomfort, and move into a discussion that has opened up a panoply of issues with that employee, not necessarily within the workplace, but at home. And frankly, Chairman, that doesn't happen on Zoom. So I beg you, I urge you not to just take this tool and say that's the panacea. There will be times when face-to-face in a room will open up all sorts of things that you can respond to as a manager and improve, sir.
I agree. I agree. I think it's equivalent to seeing your GP face-to-face. If I can use that analogy. Thank you, members. That was an interesting debate. I'd like to just add a couple of things. Paul, I started off by saying this wasn't quite what I and members were expecting. I look back at the terms of reference that were sent to you, and it's very, very clear. to review the council's current employee appraisal system. And we got hints of that, but I haven't got, I got a lot more than what we were actually asking for. So we've talked a little bit today about the data, the quantitative data, the numbers of people appraised. This started to concern me a few years back when I was finding it wasn't so much the numbers of being appraised, it was the numbers of the people who were appraised who got the highest grading. I believe it was 90% plus were getting the highest marking and grading, which can't be right because we're all not exceptional. And it was things like that that I wanted to understand, and the members, when we raised this in terms of reference, that we wanted to understand a review of the appraisal system. So I'd like very much to, if you could do a very short paper for us, just telling us what you find, what you have found, because I know you have done. I thought, first of all, when I read this, perhaps we hadn't actually done a review of the appraisal system and we had just jumped into a behavioral analysis and what have you, but I know that's not. So if I could just get that, please, and if it's not too much to ask to get a, what's good about this system, what's not so good, and if I have going on to what you did, which I think a lot of people are very appreciative, lots of questions. I have one little point which is still bothering me, so I'll be candid with you. I wrote down your statements here, and I think it's in the paper. The behavioral framework comes first. Now, I would have thought the analysis comes first, because identify what the problems were, and then you sit back and say, how do I address those problems? This paper still says to me, and I'll give you a chance to address this. The only question is, this says to me, we've decided that the behavioral framework needs to be changed, and everything will flow from that, as opposed to let's analyze what's good and what's not so good, and then figure out what behavioral framework is going to be playing. And my final point, which is related to that, is, to me, all these competencies and behavioral issues are all basic foundations. We should all act like that. And it's something that, you're only pulling somebody up. You don't have to wait to an appraisal to pull somebody up if they've broken somebody, making sexual or other comments, going around as inappropriate comments. You don't have to wait to the appraisal to pick those people up, those things up. I would like to understand that our appraisals, we have, if you look at our budgeting system, it's outcome-based budgeting is the term we get. Every time I've done, I'm an old 40-year-old corporate warrior, it's always been, what's the outcome? And it is the employee in front of me, or even the manager in front of me, are they actually getting the qualitative bits, not just the quantitative bits done? And so it's a culture of management by objectives. And if I have one little criticism of what this paper is, I found the words management by objective once in the whole paper. And the way I was brought up is it's key. It's key part of a culture. And I'd like to see that brought out a little bit more in the further work that you do. I don't know if you want any comments on it.
So in terms of review of the appraisal process, that has not happened. I'm not aware there's been a review of the appraisal process.
No, we asked for one, however.
At this moment in time. So the objective to change the competency framework to a behaviour framework was in the workforce strategy, which was agreed, obviously, when the workforce strategy came into being. What comes out of that particular piece of work, though, is a review of everything that is impacted by the need to implement the behaviour framework, of which the appraisal process is one of those. It's not just the appraisal process. We have to look at every other performance management process that links to that behaviour framework to embed it fully, because it's not just about the appraisal process. So that's where we are with the appraisal. There has not been a review of it. There will be a review of the appraisal process, because clearly, as part of embedding that behaviour framework, I also want to have a look at that particular process.
Yeah.
To say, is it right? Does it work effectively? Have we got the right systems in place? Have we got data that allows us to look at performers? We don't, people record dates at the minute, people don't record information in terms of that appraisal process. So, you know, it's something we will have to have a look at. We have not had a look at that process. And of course, you know, we need to ensure that we're discussing, having conversations with our staff to say, do you like it? Does it work? What would you like to see different, etc. And obviously taking account of direction of travel in terms of digitalization and hybrid working, all of that will impact on how that process changes.
Yeah, I understand it, but I think this is where we have our disconnect. And it may be a disconnect process between OSMC and the services, because we produced this several months ago asking for an appraisal. So, you know, it's, I think you've got most of the data. You may not have it, all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but that was fine. We were certainly expecting a review of the appraisal process tonight, and we haven't got it. And I'd like it for the next meeting if that's possible. Is that possible?
I think, Chairman, it's bringing that forward to the next meeting might be very difficult. I think Paula has outlined that the process and the journey that we are currently working to. What I can say is that I think it's perfectly appropriate for officers to bring back the output of that piece of work before we roll that out, whether that's to kind of consultation or to roll out to implementation, so that OSMC has the opportunity to contribute views about that before anything changes. So I think that there is a recognition that the processes aren't perfect, but I think we are going through a process of reviewing that so that we can come forward.
I think,
so I think the next meeting is going to be, well, I was going to say challenging. I think the reality is that will be, it won't be possible, but what I can undertake to do is to bring through the proposed output before that's
well, I just make 2 points. The paper itself actually says that it will be reviewed by June, which is next month. So if we can't have a report by September, I'm not quite sure why not, if we're on target as to your own timetable. But I think the main thing is the conversation we've now just had, we ought to have had 3 months ago when we OSMC made the request for the review. And somebody should have been coming back and saying, Chairman, OSMC, that's not going to be possible. Hence the surprise when we get the paper. Nothing wrong with the paper. It's not what we expected.
Yeah. So I apologise for that. And as I say, this is not about us not wanting to contribute or to deny members the opportunity to contribute to that. I think it is the fact that we are on a journey, and I think in fairness to Paula, that report was originally drafted for the December meeting. So I think we are clearly. There is a lot of work going on in HR, and I think
sure.
very positive changes are coming through. So I think if that would be acceptable to you and to OSMC, then we would be happy to come back and speak to Gordon about when that might be possible.
Okay, fine. Right. You see, the inspectors are, sorry, the superintendent, I just promoted you.
Thank you for demoting me.
Right. So this is the time when we as OSMC act in a slightly different capacity. I want to get the words right. We act as the council's crime and disorder committee. And we've got to do this at least once a year. And we're required to meet annually to review or scrutinize decisions made or other actions taken in connection with the discharge of the responsible authorities of the crime and disorder functions. So if I could invite the Chief Executive and Superintendent Zahid to present the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to make a start, and then Superintendent Zahid Aziz is going to come in later on with some of the detail. First of all, I'm the chair of this Building Communities Together partnership. I think it's one of those things where I didn't step back quickly enough, I think, because Zahid was doing a great job before I arrived. But we've agreed and we're working together, and it's actually helping our relationship in terms of understanding one another's roles within the partnership. I plan to just do a few slides of introduction, and then Superintendent Aziz will take on some of the detail. So if Tom can just move on to the next one, please. There we go. So there is the partnership. There is a strategic assessment that we have to do every year. That is around the crime overview that we'll be talking about shortly, and also hope to show you the partnership working and the range of people that come to the meetings very regularly, and the attendance by the various partners is very thorough as well. Tom? So in terms of the legislation, that's spelt out there, but I think the most important thing for you here tonight is the statutory partners below, of which ourselves and Thames Valley Police, but also Fire and Rescue Service, Probation and Health, Police Health, and the CCG are also the statutory partners. And in terms of what have we done, we obviously have the review of what we've been doing in our terms of reference, which has taken place in spring 2021. We need to focus on our core duties. We have got the new serious violence duties coming in shortly. And in terms of what the partnership fulfills, what other places have other boards or groups, such as the Youth Offending Team as well. But at the bottom of this slide, you'll see the other partners that we have representatives from, and they're very important representatives to the partnership. And again, the attendance from our non-statutory partners is also very good. So apart from the communities of West Berkshire, which is obviously very important, we're also accountable to the Home Secretary, the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice, and the Safeguarding Partnership. So it's a very important partnership in terms of overseeing what's going on. And our aims within the partnership are laid out there. Obviously, to reduce and prevent crime, to make sure our statutory responsibilities are covered, identify and respond to changes in terms of incidents and crime. And I think that's very important in terms of how we discuss and work on how to make things different. Safeguarding people who are vulnerable, and helping for people and communities to be part of that programme, part of the way we engage with people, and make sure they're part of that progress in terms of what we do as well. So the route for the assessment is laid out there. And it's been going for quite some time, and you'll see the various breakdowns of that assessment going right through. And we need to make sure that we do take into account any other local strategies and plans that have an important part to that annual strategic assessment. I'll now pass you over to Superintendent.
Thank you, Nigel, and to the Chair and to the members. Apologies for my late arrival today on operational duties, and I was in Reading for a review for prisoners, so my apologies for arriving late. I'll run through some of the slides. Hopefully you've already seen them. I'll summarise them very briefly in terms of some of the activities that we're doing around prevention of crime, protecting victims, reduction of incidents in terms of our demand profile, and ensuring people remain safe or safe as possible as far as we can make it through the partnership. The first slide is around domestic abuse. Domestic abuse has seen a slight increase from last year, a 6% increase. As a force, we're bucking the trend from other forces. During the lockdown, there was a general increase experience across other forces in terms of domestic violence. We were one of the few forces that had a decrease experienced. And I think what's happened over the last 6 months or so, particularly since the lockdown has ended, things have become more normalised, and therefore we're seeing a natural kind of settling of the levels of domestic abuse. It sits within our priority on the LPA. My direction to our officers is that is one of our key focus for reducing incidents, protecting victims, etc. We're working very closely with within the partnership, looking at domestic abuse response, reductions in prevention, so promotion of prevention. So we have reductions in domestic incidents, and supporting victims through either accommodation facilities or enhanced levels of support, a high-end grading of risk. There's a huge amount of support. Now, where in the middle and the lower end of those incidents, there's less support. So my objective over the next 6 months is to enhance the support mechanism within the partnership around the medium risk domestic abuse that we grade, so that they then tend not to increase into the higher end of risk. So that's the figures for West Berkshire. We are the lowest recorded of domestic abuse in the force. Next slide, please. A couple of things that we're doing on the LPA. One has almost come to an end, others still being assessed. The first one is where we are, this team has more capacity than other teams. So there is a trial where we are deploying officers to the first instance. Those officers will remain at the scene. And if there is a requirement for the offender to be arrested and taken from the scene, removed from the scene, then another set of officers will arrive and they will take the offending person away from the location, allowing the initial officers to carry on with that engagement, gathering the evidence, making sure that the victim remains supported and on board, and hopefully gathers enough evidence for us to prosecute the offender, or at least come to a suitable conclusion. That trial is ongoing at the moment. I think as our establishment numbers on the frontline response team start to increase, this is a viable option for us to adopt, at least in some of the areas that we experience within the kind of medium risk domestic abuse. The second trial, which is Team 1 trial, this one has been assessed, and our analysis would suggest it's a very effective means. We now have on this team a dedicated domestic abuse support officer. That officer has increased knowledge and understanding of the local infrastructure around support for victims, how to get access to those facilities. She and this team engages with the victims on an ongoing basis. So while she's on duty, not only will she attend those incidents that happen when she's on, but she'll also continue to support victims who have come to our attention over the past 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on what level of service they need. In a nutshell, our ability to actually keep victims on board to the point of prosecution has been enhanced, and the outcomes in terms of our positive disposals of those instances is also showing a positive mark. So both those initiatives are on go at the moment, depending on which capacity, where we have capacity and which one we would kind of finally go on. I think that both are viable, but potentially I think the Team 2 trial with the enhanced numbers may be the most viable option. But it's a demonstration of just how important we feel that domestic abuse response is. Next slide. One of the key things that I directed my staff to do last year when I arrived was to ensure that our counter drugs line response was robust and sufficient to the threat that we faced. A number of years ago, prior to the lockdown, there was quite a considerable footprint of counter drugs lines within West Berkshire LPA, and we found ourselves, and this is kind of historical data, struggling to kind of meet the response to the numbers of people that were setting up either dealing facilities within vulnerable homes or coming in by train and dropping off drugs. So my approach has been that I sufficiently staff that department, which is the priority crime, which is the tasking team, to focus on this area solely. The purpose is to engage with drug users and potentially street dealers. Obviously, we may not find the drugs on them when we engage with them, but ultimately the point is that we gain an intelligence picture of any new activity that might enter our local space, and then we can respond as quickly as we can to remove them. So we've got a number of operations over the last 12 months. Operation Flip, which was the last one delivered in March, that resulted in 7 vehicles being stopped and searched, 4 arrested, and Class A drugs and cash seized. And that's as an example of the number of ones that we've done over the course of the year, where we've been successful in closing down counter drug line operations very, very quickly. So it's a very kind of robust and flexible and responsive approach that we've adopted locally. Next slide. Another area of priority for us is violence against women and girls. This has become a kind of statutory obligation for the partnership. We are, so as an LPA, we're really keen to make sure that we're not missing any opportunities. On the 21st of March, we ran a week of action, and in that week, we delivered a number of engagement events across hotels, licensed premises, children's homes, and some schools as well. I think in total, about 400 odd people were given presentations around the awareness and awareness of women and girls' behaviours, signs and signals of that kind of behaviour. Very well received by those who were present, and it was probably the most active activity as an LPA across the force area. Operation Vigilant is an initiative where our officers who police the nighttime economy are given enhanced skills and awareness around spotting predatory behaviour. And they now police the nighttime economy with that kind of added knowledge of spotting those behaviours. In terms of our crime profile, we're very fortunate in the sense that our nighttime economy doesn't really attract that many offenders of that ilk. So albeit officers have been trained, that for me is confidence that I know if something does happen, that they're aware of what they should be doing. Next slide. So continuing on the theme of violence against women and girls, we have enhanced our investigative processes to make sure that we're not missing any opportunities around investigative outcomes. There's a better crime management process to prioritise precursor crimes, and those are the kind of signal crimes that indicate somebody's sexual propensity towards potentially more serious sexual offending. So, for example, indecent exposure, sexual touching, even possibly name calling to a point that it becomes a public order incident directed or indicated towards the opposite sex. It is now being looked at through a management meeting that we're setting up in the next few weeks in terms of our managing our ongoing offender management as well as prevention work. We have delivered a significant amount of training to our frontline staff around domestic violence protection orders. So where an offender has, where a suspect has been arrested, there isn't sufficient evidence for us to prosecute that individual. Inquiries come to an end. There is an opportunity for officers to consider what we call a DVPO or DVPN, which enables, through the authorisation of superintendent, to prevent that person, the suspect, not an offender because they haven't been prosecuted, from not approaching that individual, that home or that family for a period of 14 to 28 days. This is initially authorised by the superintendent and then goes on to court for it to be a rubber stamped by the court as a domestic violence protection order. These are gaining more momentum, and I'm happy to say that our officers are now understanding the benefits of this. It reduces crime, reduces re-victimisation of the victim, and it reduces our demand as well, so we can focus on other things. So all in all, it's a positive step. We're really keen to engage with local advocate groups and stakeholders to identify victim needs, and that's part of the process that we're working through with the Building Communities Together partnership to try and understand exactly where the gaps are, what else we need to kind of introduce. And we're also looking at public spaces. So there is a government website that enables the public to go on to that website and identify local places, maybe underpasses, parks, etc., that they feel either unsafe or vulnerable at. So that's monitored on a weekly basis by neighbourhood inspector, and any of those locations that flag up to us as being places where we can focus on more prevention work or more better lighting, cutting back on trees or bushes, etc. That's being done again through the partnership. Next slide. Another priority is knife crime. This is a force priority for Thames Valley Police. We are the second lowest LPA for knife crime offences. A number of these offences are recorded for statistical reasons. So somebody may have reported they may have seen a knife. If we can't discount that then it has to be recorded as a knife incident. So our knife offences and knife incidents are very low, given the kind of wide category of us having to capture those incidents. But again, there's a lot of work around youth knife carrying or weapon carrying with a range of prevention work through the safeguarding team, through the youth, the yacht team, to deal with those perpetrators if they are found with knives, or we have indication that they are involved in knife carrying. Next slide. Violence offences as an LPA, I think we are the one with the least number of offences. Although there's been a slight rise for us compared to last year, but I think that's naturally the case given the fact that people are now have been freed up from the lockdown restrictions. So that's the kind of figures around knife crime. Violent offences. Next slide, please. And this is just another demonstration in a different format of the level of offences in a graph format. Next slide. As a local police area, there is a funding for us to tap into, £7.7 million funding that's been given to Thames Valley Police. What it calls is GRIP funding. So we can apply for funding for specific operations if we feel there is a hotspot or if we feel there's a particular trend developing. So we are mindful of this capacity for us to tap into should that be required. Up to now, we haven't had that requirement. But we have the lowest number of serious violent offences in the force. The numbers are small for a fairly large area with a nighttime economy. Next slide. And this is a slide really just in terms of the neighbourhood team. Our neighbourhood team, I think, do a fantastic job. They're out in the community. They are our kind of voice and face of Thames Valley Police. Frontline officers are very much committed towards investigation, responding to incidents. The neighbourhood team have a very different, I suppose, approach to policing. Theirs is around understanding what the community needs, looking at the crime trends, for example, and if it's antisocial behaviour, rural crime, whether it's animal crime, etc., they will pick those things up. We've recently had an introduction of a new problem solving and prevention analyst in Cara Clay, the lady at the bottom on the right hand corner. So she enables us to have a clear picture of where our crime trends are happening, so we can scan and then problem solve those issues. And she's been a real asset to our understanding of the crime profile and where we need to focus our attention. And I think that's the last slide for me. Next slide. Oh, there is one more, sorry. The two more slides, okay. The public spaces protection order, we've had one running in the Newbury Town Centre, which has been very successful and has reduced a huge amount of antisocial behaviour. We are in the process of applying the similar PSPO for the Thatcham Town Centre, again, based on the kind of increasing amount of antisocial behaviour, and we're hopeful that will be secured, hopefully in the next few months. And the final slide. So just in terms of activity around antisocial behaviour, over the last 12 months, we've had 15 house closures, which is a significant amount of work for the police staff member I have who kind of works on this along with his team. We've managed to secure 6 criminal behaviour orders, and these are really effective in terms of people's offenders' propensity towards crime. If they breach the criminal behaviour order on the back of a criminal offence and the court has imposed this, then they are more than likely looking at some sort of custodial sentence, so a real deterrent for people continuing on with their antisocial behaviour. And the final thing is in relation to the community protection order warnings and notices, which we issue out to people who are at the low threshold of criminality, but they need some awareness and understanding of the impact of their behaviour. And again, we've issued I think 3 over the course of the last 6 months, I think it is. So that's the kind of general profile of our activity, some of our priorities, and hopefully that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. And then just that final slide there, picking up on some of the points that Zahid has mentioned in terms of how we work with our partners. you'll see that there are things we do across all our partners and trying to make them more aware of what's going on with things like need to know sessions and multi-agency discussions, and making sure that we hear from people that we don't normally hear from, or people that can help us to solve some of the issues we have. And obviously the council has a role in terms of some of the enforcement decisions as well, that we mentioned in terms of the end there. Thank you. We'll try to answer any questions you can.
Thank you, gentlemen. I've got 4 hands up at the moment. First one is Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Zahid, for the comprehensive brief. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions because I know that there's many more members queuing up. So I'll start at the beginning. In terms of the trials, Superintendent, between the two ways of handling reports and incidents of domestic abuse, and you talked about the different ways that they were impacting, and hopefully be more positive for the victims and for criminal prosecutions, etc., where necessary. Who's assessing those? Are they the assessments being done by third parties, or is it internal to the the police service?
It's internal, and it's a performance team who will look at the kind of data and understand which is the better of the two options. I think just to point out that every police area is different. So depending on the dynamics, depending on the levels and gradings of the types of incidents we deal with, I think we need to have a kind of a localised approach.
Yeah.
And this is very different from perhaps the approach in Reading, in Slough, and Cherbourne West.
Yeah, thank you for that. And secondly, on the county lines, in terms of the arrests and everything else, there's been a number of reports nationally, about county lines, some of which are quite disturbing. Do Thames Valley and yourself, particularly within the partnership, if you apprehend juveniles, for example, who are particularly vulnerable to this, what guidelines are you following in terms, because obviously that's one or two of the high profile ones is where young people are maybe put back into potentially unsafe, in terms of intelligence gathering. And I know intelligence gathering is crucial to any criminal investigation, but what safeguards have you got as a force to ensure that boundaries and unreasonable behaviour, because those children are potentially extremely vulnerable, as I'm sure you're aware. So can you reassure the public that where people are being coerced into, which I would imagine a lot of the county lines trafficking is done with a level of coercion, can you assure people that the welfare of those juveniles and vulnerable individuals is paramount?
Absolutely, Councillor Masters. So in terms of intelligence, we will never dispatch a person under the age of 18 or somebody who has vulnerabilities as a human source of intelligence. That is not something that we as a force have a policy to do. So that should never happen. In terms of the young people that we come across involved in county drugs line supply, depending on the circumstances, depending on their previous history of the number of occasions they perhaps have come to our attention, the starting point is always that they are victims. And therefore there's a process and a kind of wraparound service that we provide them through the youth offending team and through other kind of partnerships that we have. However, if somebody is persistent, then obviously we have to prosecute, and then we will prosecute, again with the aim of determining from doing further crime. So to your first point, there is absolutely no appetite in our force, and there's a clear policy around not using juveniles or children as human source for information.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Abbs.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and thanks very much for the presentation. Page 30 of our pack is the domestic abuse numbers, and it obviously clearly says we're the smallest increase in the county, which is great. Any increase is not great, sorry, so let me reverse what I've just said there. But the thing that I'm most interested in, if I look at those areas of the county and then think about pro-ratering that in terms of number of people per per area or number of homes. Where does that then put us in terms of how well or not we really are doing? And I have a second one on page 34, where I was wondering whether one of the activities when you identify these areas where there's a higher crime, are we not putting monitoring, or what kind of monitoring are we putting in to try and really get to the bottom of what's going on in those areas?
Oh, sorry. So, in terms of the, I suppose the proportional data compared to other local police areas, to be honest, I don't have that information to hand. I could certainly find out and pass it through so that you can have that information.
Yeah. You understand why I think it's important. You know, we could be lulled into a false sense of security here, thinking, oh yes, it's all nice in West Berkshire compared with others, but in fact, it may actually be worse.
Okay, that's a good challenge. I will certainly.
It wasn't meant as a challenge. I'm just
no, but
looking for data.
It's a very fair point, and I think we have to probably look at it in more detail. I would probably suggest that we are probably on par with a number of other LPs in terms of population size, and therefore it's probably a true reflection of our position.
If you could confirm that, that'd be lovely. Thank you, Superintendent.
Okay, so your second point was in relation to slide 34.
When you're on page 34, we were talking about vulnerable women and girls, and you started to talk about actions that were taken when areas were reported to you in terms of where people felt unsafe. And I'm just wondering what kind of monitoring you're putting in, or are you putting monitoring in place when these places are reported? Is that part of what we do?
Yes, so as part of our kind of violence against women and girls review group, the local inspector will bring along the data from this website, and we will try and identify if there is anything that we can do if a place has been identified. Up to now, I think there's been about 130 odd submissions. They tend to be around underpasses and park areas, and there's probably not much we can particularly do because even if I'm, for example, going home from a night out, for example, at 10 o'clock at night, walking through an underpass probably would make me feel slightly uneasy. So whether it's specifically to gender or whether it's just a location which people feel slightly unnerved at, we're not sure. So ultimately, we have identified 3 or 4 locations. We've looked at them. There's probably not much more that we can do at this stage. I think if the trend in terms of the reporting starts to rise, obviously we'll look at it again. But we monitor it, we review it on a kind of every fortnight basis, and then we will adopt any.
Sorry, Superintendent, I may have misled them. When I meant monitoring, installing things like CCTV to actually monitor what's going on, as opposed to monitoring the numbers.
I see. Sorry, yeah. So we haven't had that need yet. I think if that was a requirement, then we would look at some sort of a funding stream to gain that opportunity. Now, in the past, we used to have mobile CCTVs that we could deploy and then redeploy at another location. We don't have that capacity anymore, but one of the things I am thinking about through my Commanders Fund is reintroducing that so we can be a bit more flexible in our response to this type of deployment.
I thought you might be able to tap into some of that 7 million that you're just about to receive.
That's unfortunately, that's just for operations and not for hard infrastructure.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, Superintendent, I'm very pleased about this report. Generally, there is good news. There are some worrying things in terms of domestic abuse going up, even though we're the least. But also, it's important that we now also, as well as all the other important areas, we're recognising violence against women and girls, which is vitally important throughout the United Kingdom. I might be throwing something in. The Secretary of State for Education has issued a government-sponsored report on children's services, which came out recently. I haven't examined it in any great detail, so I wondered if you and the Chief Exec wants to input something on a fairly broad sort of basis in terms of it happening in terms of child protection, because that's very important. and how you feel it's relevant to West Berkshire Council area. That's the first thing. And then the second one is quite a quickie. Or should I just ask you the first and I'll come back on the second? But that's
Okay,
quite...
guys, get the second one out
Okay.
quick. As if it's a quick.
Yeah, I'm quite proud of the new Thiel community fire station, which the police have got an input there. And do you have any, I think there's been some positive feedback. I spoke to PCSO on that, and she was quite pleased with it. But
And your quickie question is?
That's the quickie one.
So is that the one in Hungerford? Or is that the one?
The one in Thiel.
One in
that's just
Thiel,
been built,
yeah.
yes.
So we're based in Pangbourne before, which was, you know, in a I suppose a community hub, shall we say. Thiel is slightly out of the way. It's kind of on its own. I think the officers, their perspective is that they're more accessible towards Thatcham. It's not far from their kind of from Thatcham. I haven't had any specific feedback to say it's not working from the community, so I'm assuming that it is. But certainly they're much more visible because they can kind of get to places like Mortimer, for example, to Pangbourne, to Thatcham in a fairly short space of time. So I think it's much more accessible for the local policing area. So back to your first point. I haven't read the report myself. I have kind of heard some news coverage on this. One of the things that I find is often when we take children into our protection, it's really difficult to find accommodation for them. And they often have to be put into temporary fostering. And there's a churn of fosters, one after the other, until somebody adopts them or they go back to their home location. One of the things that I think would be useful is, and I think it's mentioned in a suggestion in the report, is that family members, whether they're grandparents, whether they're uncles, whether they're other kind of close relatives, are enabled somehow to try and support their family member. So, and what the suggestion is by payment. So you may have a grandparent who can't afford to have another child at home, shall we say. And I think that's a really good suggestion. I think that would alleviate some of the pressure that we have around making sure that the child is in a safe place. But the safeguarding partnership works really well. My safeguarding team is very embedded with the local partnership, and we have a very robust process around making sure that the children, if they're coming to our attention, the follow-on activity around their care and around their reoffending, it doesn't happen, or the vulnerability doesn't happen. So I'm fairly happy that is the case. And Nigel, do you want to add anything?
Thank you very much.
Claire, Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have 3 questions. I hope you don't mind if you indulge me with that. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for a really excellent presentation to Nigel and the Superintendent. As Safer Streets Champion of West Berkshire, I'd also like to acknowledge the brilliant work of Emily Evans, particularly on her work against violence against women and girls, which has been superb. And also Susan Powell within West Berkshire, who has been fantastic. And also John Winstanley and his team, who've been looking at the underpasses and looking at cutting back vegetation in various patches across the district, which has been incredibly helpful. But my 3 questions, first of all, just on Project Vigilant, I'm not sure that this operates in West Berkshire. Is it Reading only? And are there dedicated officers sort of going into pubs just in Reading? That was my first question. Should we take that first and then?
So it started off in Oxford because Oxford had a significant increase in sexual offending during the nighttime economy on the Friday and Saturday evenings, Sunday evenings as well. That's where it was piloted, and it's then been rolled out across the force to LPAs where there is a need for this approach. I think as I said in my presentation, we really don't have a nighttime economy sexual offending footprint. It just isn't there, thankfully. But what we have done is we have enhanced the knowledge and understanding of our officers around spotting signs of vulnerability of females, perhaps if they are leaving nightclubs late at night on their own, perhaps drunk, or offending behaviour. One example that we came across was a vehicle that kept circling round and round and round, which is very unusual around the town centre. and that was stopped. And he actually was a sexual offender with the previous history. So it's that awareness of the officers, not to say it happens on a regular basis, but they can identify those trends or those behaviours early on. So my direction to the officers is be aware, and if something does concern, then be active and engage and try and either dismiss your suspicions or act and enforce.
Thank you. My second question relates to the comment you made about mobile CCTV and underpasses. This is incredibly topical, and I've had quite a few inquiries about it, actually. I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit more about how you've seen that work, how it's been effective. And also, obviously, I appreciate there's funding challenges, but if that was something that you would consider, sort of the sort of timescale that you're talking about here to implement something like that in West Berkshire.
So my experience of working in Slough and in Reading in kind of past guises was that they both had mobile CCTV within the partnership. I think for Reading, it was actually in the local authority. And in Slough, I think it was a partnership between the police and the local authority. So I think it's a gap that we have. I think we would certainly benefit from not just violence against women and girl offending, but also other offending types as well. So I'm quite happy, or I think there is a need for us to perhaps have a conversation to say how we can kind of move this forward. I have a pot of money as an LPA commander that I can invest things in, and this is one of the things that I would definitely consider. I'll have a conversation with Nigel and the Building Community Togethers Partnership. Brilliant. To see whether this is something we can collaboratively kind of move forward in a fairly quick space of time.
Thank you. And finally, Chairman, if that's okay, my final question was just in relation to perhaps a bit more of a challenging issue, which is the recent conviction of the Newbury police officer. And I'm just wondering what awareness campaigns, or if there's anything that Thames Valley is looking at to implement. You talked in the context of predators in the nighttime economy, whether there's an awareness campaign around the victims to spot things, certain behaviours to ensure it doesn't happen again. I wondered if there was maybe a national thing going on as well in the light of what's happened in the Met as well.
Yeah. So it's a really unfortunate situation. Can I just kind of give just a bit of context to this? About 2.5 years ago, this officer was working within West Berkshire Police. His behaviour came to the attention of one of our inspectors, who then did some probing and then flagged it to our professional standards department, who immediately requested investigation. He was suspended and hasn't been on patrol for 2.5 years. Almost instantly, he was suspended and then removed from frontline duties. His behaviour, the instances where he has engaged with victims, because he, I suppose, selected his victims because they were vulnerable because of domestic violence. And some of them he actually engaged with as an officer responding to an incident, and he was able to kind of gain some information from them as an ascending officer. Others he accessed through the police computer system, so there's a breach of data protection. In any case, he was removed from frontline duties. An investigation commenced. It took almost two years for us to kind of conclude that investigation. Not us, the IOPC. So we had provided all the information, and the IOPC, through their channels of investigative kind of processes, concluded investigation about 4 or 5 months ago. He then went to court. In the court, he was found guilty of both misuse of public office and data protection offences. So he was sentenced, I think, to 2.5 years imprisonment. On the face of it, he was a good officer. He was proactive. He didn't exhibit any signs of particular predatory behaviour. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes it's not obvious, but things do happen. And what we have done internally is make sure that our supervisors are monitoring those risk areas to make sure that those things don't happen in the future. So that's the first thing. In terms of the communication with the public, our approach has been, since the kind of Sarah Everard incident, to almost detach ourselves from the instance in the Met, and as a force to kind of to focus on the positive things that we as the police are doing in Thames Valley. Accepting the fact that this happened in West Berkshire, what we have done, and I think there was a news article last week in the Newbury News around some advice for members of the public, if they feel uncertain, then they can ask for that officer to radio into the control room, and they can confirm or ask the control room to then contact the person so they can confirm the identity of the individual. In terms of plainclothes operations, we will very, very rarely, I can't say no for definite, but very, very rarely will we have a lone working officer. So that communication is also going out to the public as well. I've cascaded this communication to the IAG and through other partnerships to try and kind of vocalize this across the community. I haven't specifically done a piece locally, and that is because there was a particular a direction, I suppose, from the force to say that we don't want to flag something up that really isn't a big issue, except in the fact it's happened in West Berkshire. It doesn't happen in other areas of the force. So I've been slightly reticent to kind of go all out, but I think the kind of the general conversations through the IAG, which has 15 or 16 members who are getting out to the networks, I think is probably sufficient, unless you think otherwise.
I'm very grateful for your answer. I think that's appropriate. It was just more about awareness, sort of flagging it to victims, sort of potential victims and women, particularly where they can ask for, you know, to recognise the signs, you know, whether there was some things around mobile numbers and getting them, you know, things like that. But yeah. I appreciate the communications have to be quite delicate potentially. But it's great to hear, and I think for the public to be reassured of all the things that you've considered and put in place. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. I noticed Councillor Bridgman, who was attending this meeting, this is an attendee, has got his hand up. Now, we don't normally, you have to be a member of OSMC to ask a question, but I'm minded to give a little bit of latitude here.
Make a habit.
I won't make a habit, you're right. Councillor Bridgman, a quick question, please.
Chairman, thank you. It's a reflection as much as anything. You'll know that Building Communities Together Partnership falls within my portfolio. And you'll also know that sitting beneath BCTP is the Domestic Abuse Board. And indeed, below that is a lived experience subgroup. So there's the voice of the victim. We hear the voice of the victim. And one of the things I was reflecting on, as Superintendent Aziz will know, Emily Evans sits on the Domestic Abuse Board, and very useful that dialogue is. With any rising number of reported crime, it might be because there is more of it. It might be because it is better detected. We are detecting more of it. Or it might be because, and this is one of the things we strive with domestic abuse, that people are coming forward and reporting, and that victims are coming forward. Just wonder whether the superintendent has wanted to reflect on where in that sort of panoply of causation we might be in relation to the numbers.
I would say there is more confidence now in the public coming forward and reporting domestic abuse. And I say that because I think 28% of the domestic abuse actually are male victims. Now that number has been increasing year on year. And I think it reflects the confidence that people now have to say, A, first of all, it's unacceptable, and B, it should be reported. So my sense would be partly it's down to the fact that people have more awareness and can report. And secondly, the outcomes for domestic abuse in terms of the support that we give if we don't actually get the offender charged, but the support that we give, I think, encourages people to report incidents so that they can at least get the help that they need, if not the prosecution of the offender. So I think it's probably those two things are the key factors that are perhaps driving the incidents. I don't feel it's growing. That's my sense, because if I think of the repeat incidents that are kind of reported to us, they tend to be roughly at the same level, which I think would suggest that those individuals are, sorry, they seem to be increasing, which would suggest then that there is more confidence to continue to report those incidents. So it's a combination of, I think, better appreciation of reporting, and also having confidence that if the police if you do report to the police, you will get some support.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent. I've just got one little question for you. We've got all the statistics on the crimes either going up or sideways or whatever. What about the other side of the picture? What's your head count like? How has that changed over the last 12, 24 months?
So Chairman, it's a very challenging picture. I'll be honest with you. We are relatively stable in terms of the numbers. What the challenge now is that we are having an uplift in a number of officers. So 600 officers increasing over a 3-year period. Last year we had 324 officers, new officers coming in to the organisation, and as an LPA, we've received our share of the uplift in the new officers. The issue is that the officers now are on a new training programme, which requires them to have protected learning time, which is quite considerable in the first year, slightly less on the second year, and probably minimal in the third year, which then requires them to be away from frontline policing. So although they're on our payroll, they're actually not available for policing response. That has caused us some quite difficult decisions to be made. So for example, our neighbourhood teams, normally they set at, say for example, 100% of our kind of neighbourhood team being out deployable. Currently, they're at 20%, because the other 80% of the neighbourhood staff are backfilling the frontline response function. And that's the same for the priority crime team, it's the same for the problem solving team, and it's the same for some of the other functions that we have. So it's a challenging picture. I think over the course of next year, towards the summer, that picture will improve. But we have a journey to go through in terms of demand at the front end being met and insufficient capacity at the back end to prevent crime and do safeguarding in the best maximum way we have been used to in the past. And one of the things I share with my partnership meetings is the fact that there's less capacity, and we probably need to kind of share more of the workload that perhaps the police used to in the past.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Our colleagues around the table have complimented you both on the presentation. I'd also like to compliment you on the way you have communicated and handled the questions. Thank you. Very, very good. Clearly on top of the game. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Item 8, we'll move on to the customer journey, the out of hours aspect. You all recall that OSMC established a task and finish group chaired by Councillor James Cole to look at the customer journey. And we as OSMC requested an interim report be brought to this meeting to set out the task group's findings in relation to the emergency out of hours service. So I could invite Caroline Richardson to present the report, please. And then we'll ask Councillor Cole to give us his comments. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's fair to say that this is just part of the journey that we're on just now as well, because I think through the first meeting of the task and finish group that I was involved in, there was quite a few bits that were coming out of it. So there's more to go back into the task and finish group is the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that report is based on the officers' side of things, so it's not actually linking in with this. Well, it is linking in with what Councillor Cole and the rest of the task and finish group are coming up with suggested recommendations. So the recommendations that I've put in here are just my input into it, if you like. So I suppose just taking you just briefly through the report and what what I tried to portray in it was actually a little bit about the background, because I think sometimes we forget where we come from and why we do what we do, and to some extent it's a good opportunity to reflect, myself as leading on the out of hours part of it, as to why we do things the way that we have. And I've had to do a lot of digging back sometimes to find out why we've done some things which were before my time being involved in it. So I've taken the document is providing the background about where we have been involved in providing an out of hours service, which is at least from the 1980s and probably before that, to be fair, and including the legal background as to why we do it. I've then tried to focus a little bit more about actually the processes and how the customer then engages with us. Whether at this moment in time, and I'll say that at the moment, at this moment in time, through a phone call through to a contact centre, which we is a contracted out of hours service rather than an in-house service that we provide. It's deals with approximately 800 calls a year. It went down quite a bit in 2020, but has picked up again but it's roughly about 800 calls a year that the contact centre deals with. And normally, actually, very little negative feedback. There have been some incidents that we've had reports of issues which we've investigated and dealt with through our usual engagement with the contractor. And actually probably through the monitoring by the officers that work on this with me, they probably find more issues that we deal with on a sort of day-to-day basis. We're not regularly picking things up, but we do find the odd thing that they might have done incorrectly and challenge them on that. I think, I mean, the paper itself takes you through the journey of what we've actually got, and what we're actually trying to focus on is it's not an extension of of normal hours. It's emergency response only. So we've got to be mindful about all that it's not having a lot of officers actually being available 24/7. There are a core number of services and officers that are available to actually respond to incidents that, if they're not dealt with, would potentially cause more issues or life-threatening issues from the public point of view. It's also the door into escalation if there was a major incident. So it's that route that the out of hours contact, out of hours process is all about. It's, as I say, not an extension of the normal daytime services. It's all led by an out of hours manual, which is contributed to by all the services. So we're very reliant on all the services providing that information, and that's sometimes when some of the glitches will happen because we don't get the update from the services. But we do try and drill down as much as we can to actually make sure that these services provide the information that we actually need to make sure we've got a smooth and effective out of our service as we can. I think all I would probably say is sort of we have sort of identified a few things that I find identified a few areas that we could improve on through doing this process, which is always good to have that opportunity to reflect a little bit about what we can do. And they've been identified in the report itself. And obviously there's been others that have been identified when we were actually doing the first scrutiny process. So I'll probably stop at that point and hand over to Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Caroline. Just before you do, actually, one of my colleagues has just made a decent suggestion. I guess there's only one officer left. Paula, you don't have to sit through the rest of this if you don't wish to. It's entirely up to you. If you're enjoying yourself, fine, you can stay here. Thank you very much, Caroline. I've got Councillor Abbs and then Councillor Linden.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
And Jeff, thank you. I've got, yeah, thank you. Three of you.
Sorry, mine's a really simple one. I maybe I just misheard, but I heard you say 800 calls, but then when I look at Appendix 2, it's 593. I'm just, did I mishear or misunderstand or what?
It was probably me. It's possibly me.
Oh, okay. So I just believe the graph, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, fine, that's fine.
The written word is it.
I thought, Chairman, you were going to let me make some comments next.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask the questions first and then make the comment, but if you don't mind, let me just carry on with the questions. Okay.
Up to you. Your Chairman.
Okay. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was very interested with this report, Carolyn. So that was very good. Just one slight mistake, because I know there's been a bit of misunderstanding. On page 66, 5.3, we've been the same council since the 1st of April 1974. We just had a name change and took the county council responsibilities. On just some other comments on page 80 in terms of out of hours. I'll just say that obviously in terms of the Thames Valley Fire Control, they do an excellent job, and certainly hearing their calls, it's very, very professional. So I just thought I'd give you that input. There's also been a change on fire alarms because there's a lot of false alarms on commercial properties, not residential or homes or other accommodations. So we are reducing amount of commercial responses to false alarms to reduce the numbers, because it obviously stops us going to other fires. But yes, I'm very impressed with the report, but it is very useful for people to contact the out of hours service. I know I haven't done it recently, but it is still an excellent service and you're doing an excellent job.
It's an emergency, Tony.
In an emergency, I know you're not there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year doing everything, but yeah.
Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, but I'd first like to start off by saying on page 68, there is a schematic. And frankly, that's exactly the sort of thing I was referring to in the conversation about appraisals. I can follow that very, very easily. I wonder if it's on the website. So if somebody wanted to look at the out of hours service on the website, they'd see that that process flow. But I think that brings to light very quickly how the service works, what it's there for and what it's not there for. Councillor Linda's just called this an excellent service, but the report calls it an adequate service, page 65. So are you hiding your light under a bushel, or is it not excellent? And it's only adequate. I had cause to use it myself some time ago, and Caroline might remember this, when people couldn't get out of the Kennet Centre car park. And I phoned it on a Saturday and was told, well, there's nobody here from car parks. So, but meanwhile, there were a lot of engines running underground and some potential for some serious health issues or risks. So I haven't done a secret sort of shopper. I know you and I are quite keen on those for a while. And I'd like to ask through you, Chair, what Caroline feels would happen now, the urgency, if some event like that happened. And also, I'd like to know if we do ask lay people to phone up and trial this service in that secret shopper way. I'm beginning to think we do an awful lot of internal testing and not enough user acceptance testing. The user being a person outside of the authority who is able to test our systems in ways we wouldn't if we were inside the authority. So quite a few questions there, Chairman, that I'd like to get some feedback on, please. Caroline?
Okay, thank you. As far as adequate is concerned, I'm not very good at blowing my own trumpet, but I think they do actually do quite a good job, actually, the service, considering. And actually, as I said, the key thing for me is they're not there to decide, they're there to follow a manual. And if the manual is wrong because some of our services haven't given the correct information, that can be part of the problem. And I do know that one of the things that we do every year is look at, just as we have done in this report, where the calls are, where the services are that have got the highest numbers of calls, so we can actually go back to them, because we actually do get charged. I've had a reduction, I hasten to add, but we do get charged if we go, if there's an excess number of calls. So then more number of calls I can reduce, because looking at the calls coming in and saying, we're getting a lot of calls from the Kennet Centre car park, why is that? And then going back to car parks to help improve signage or whatever it may be. So we do that side of things. As far as lay people doing a secret shopper kind of thing, I'll caution that one, because what I don't want to do, if you go in and do that, I need to have people set by to answer the calls, because what they will do is they'll follow the manual and they may well phone the duty officer, and if they don't know that that's happening, their hairs might be running. So we just need to be careful how we do that. I don't mind people calling up the contact centre, but I'd like it to be a managed one, that, and I wouldn't tell them that you're going to be doing it, but I would like to know that the officers at the other end know that this is likely to happen, to monitor what the response is from the contact centre. Does that make
Rather
sense?
defeats the purpose, I think, of a secret shopper.
We could end up phoning through to a duty officer who's not aware of a secret shopper side of things, and they set the whole, contact a whole load of other people that might not be appropriate to actually do for an exercise. I think there's a way we can do it, but we just need to manage it.
We possibly have.
How often would you test it? This is the point. What you're saying is, if the manual is not right, then there is room for problems. And the manual may not be updated until annually. So during the year, you're at some degree of risk. So you've got to do some sort of testing, surely.
We do phone up, but I have other officers that are on call, ready to take the calls. So for example, let's think of something, if it was to do with an AWE incident, if you like, if somebody was phoning up about that, then they would be calling through to the duty emergency manager or emergency duty officer. If that emergency duty officer wasn't aware that this was an exercise, we would be cascade calling out to 27 different organisations, setting up a whole response, which we don't want to do necessarily. So we need to just be, that's the kind of thing that I would be thinking of more so. It's just be managed.
I get all that. I get all that. All of a sudden, you know, every newspaper in the country is focused on it, Aldermaston, because somebody phoned up about some overflowing dog bin over there. I get it. I get it. But what's the feedback loop, Chairman? So if I phone the out of hours service, how do we try and capture, was that service adequate? Did you get what you wanted? Did you get it in time? How are we getting that feedback loop from real users?
I take your point. I also take a point that Caroline's making is that some of this may be controllable within our own, but if we're starting to set hairs going and fire engines going off, alarm bells and number 10 because we've got a secret shopper, I can see the point. It needs to be properly managed, I would think. Nigel, you want to say something?
Yes, we have had a recent process where we've checked our internal communications for very important things that could happen in the future. We did that only a couple of months ago. I can't tell you the exercise it was, but we have done that and we have learned from that cascading process as well. And although officers were aware that something might happen within a time scale, they weren't aware of the day or the time or anything of that nature. So we have had that process that's gone on within the last couple of months.
Thank you. And if I could just, before we come to Councillor Cole, if I could just come in and say that if you turn to page 77, about the 2 complaints made about the service in the last few years, number 1 is me. So it's bad news and good news. I had an atrocious experience, that I'll come back to in a moment, but I've had 2 other occasions to call in the last 2 years. And I had good experience on the other 2 occasions. So the lesson that I got, the frustration that I had was, and it comes from that little diagram that Councillor Brooks likes so much. I found all 3 of my calls were highways related. And one was traffic lights not working, another one was a tree down, another one was a major flood. And it seems to me that when you think about out of hours emergencies, weekends, evenings, highways is probably a key one. And I would have thought we should have got in one of those, rather than having it in the any other emergency bracket, we ought to have, it seems to be more important to me than dogs lost and found. Now, I understand why the dogs lost and found is there.
Dogs are very important, Chair. I do have a dog. But
Yeah, but I mean, if in the occasion of the flood, we were having 5 or 6 houses potentially swamped, I think that's more important than looking for a lost dog, don't you? Yeah, okay.
It's like, I mean, there is a very valid reason for it.
Yes,
and it's all to do with the phones and the redirection.
I understand that, but Councillor Cole has explained it to me. That's my only point. I would have thought that a lot of people calling in, it's got to be highways related stuff, and we should, rather than you do go through a bit of a hoop. And if that means that you have to have a highways duty officer on to be able to refer to directly, then perhaps so be it. And that would be my only suggestion.
Sir, about feedback, are we recording these calls for training purposes and being able to review them? I get that all the time when I phone up anywhere now. If we're recording the calls, we can do spot checks. You don't need the secret shopper then. Yeah. Okay. Right. An answer. I mean, or is it a suggestion? I thought a suggestion. Go ahead.
The answer is that they are recorded, because when we have any, when we monitor them we don't listen to them every day. But when we monitor the reports coming from the contact centre, or we get a call from a resident.
You certainly were able to
do it.
verify my complaints. So, it was on that. Okay. I left James to the end because,
Sorry, Chairman, I have a question. if I may.
sorry, Councillor, I missed your hand.
It's a quick question. Carolyn, thank you very much for a really comprehensive report. I think when this first came to OSMC, when this request was generated, I think it was Councillor Dillon that actually brought this forward. One of the points that was raised was about accommodating customers with disabilities. I just wondered, I didn't pick anything up in the report. There's lots of elements of it. Has that been considered in terms of how we accommodate the customer journey for people who are disabled, whether that's sight, vision, deaf, whatever?
Sorry. It has been, and there's been, I think there's, as a result of this, because at the moment it's directly through a phone call, and part of the suggestions are that there's other means of actually potentially contacting out of hours, which will need to be investigated. So is that sort of further down the line, that's a bit more that's coming through from, I'm stealing Councillor Cole's chips now, but I will stop there.
Okay. I left Councillor Cole to the end because there's two aspects here. There's one, he's going to make some comments on the out of hours, and he's also on a further item to give us a little bit of an update on the customer journey task group. So, James.
Would you like me to do both in one then?
Yes, please.
Okay. We thought that Carolyn's report was a very good report. It's an awful lot of information. It didn't stop us asking for more. We thought our first session with Carolyn was very useful. We got into things like, could the job be done in-house? Answer straightforward, not in the current budget. We looked at things like, should we be able to use better local knowledge? The current provider is actually not very far away in the New Forest. And last time this went out, Sovereign and the fire service did not bid, which I thought was a pity. Others that did bid were not as acceptable as the one that was taken on. Carolyn's referred to numbers of staff. Core numbers of staff now available appear to be reducing. Mutual aid with other councils is difficult because of lack of systems access. So that's a subject that may need to be looked at. Some services, when this question of adequacy or wonderfulness, some services do not provide out of hours. There was a football club fire recently. It was not reported to the council. There was no comms person on call. It was actually picked up on social media. We looked at things like ensuring that people know how to access the out of hours service. Single number, transferring the main number at the end of office hours, and moving. Perhaps that's part of a new phone system, but moving to one number. Carolyn's referenced other communications channels. We've talked of things like WhatsApp. And yes, whether we can do it on this particular part of what we're looking at, we certainly want to do the secret shopper approach. And we're certainly looking at that. We will have some recommendations. We've all felt, Carolyn included, that actually this contract should be managed by the call centre, the daytime call centre, not Carolyn. I think we'd be quite glad to be shot of it if I read her expression correctly. But we do want to see that more is done to publicise out of hours contact information, that people know where to go. We are much looking forward to hearing what our new CEO has to say about this. I believe he's coming to the next session. Not just to talk about this, but other things too, no doubt. And we're looking forward to seeing some stats next time around. And we are, of course, also looking forward to hearing what members of the public and some members of the council have to say. And that's, I'm referring just to this. We have subsequently had a session with Sharon Ogden and the call centre. Similar issues like single numbers. We had a paper from Phil Rumans about the website. The new online reporting tool sounds rather good. Takes photographs. Sorry, it allows photographs to be uploaded. That certainly needs to be promoted. We talked a bit about the council's main website. The My Account option does sound very promising. One thing did become more and more clear. We want to talk to more people. Chairman, I know you want to give your views on certain things. I know that Councillor Rolls would like to do the same, and I believe Councillor Abbs would like to do the same, just picking three of you. Timing, the schedule has already been changed. We found that the 2 weeks between meetings was pretty much impossible for officers, let alone members. 3 weeks is bad enough. We're now talking about November. We'll certainly try to make that. After all, thoughts of the LRIE task group all over again don't really appeal. Well,
I think I hear from many people.
Is that satisfactory for now, Chairman?
I think that's a good update. Any questions of the council? No. Okay, fine. So that's your item 10 done, but I've got a couple other item 10s. Now I need to go back to item 9.
Sorry, Chairman, if I just may, speaking of our website as the journey, is it down at the moment? Or I just went to access it to look up something and I can't get it. So is the whole website down? Sorry. No, I'm still on Zoom. And I do want to contribute to this whole business of the journey, because that's my field of expertise. So I'm really happy to be called in to help with that.
Well, we are much looking forward to it.
Right, let me move on. Item 9,
it's up.
Where is Councillor Marino's hand? I do not see it.
I'm getting the website.
Ah.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I was just to say that I've just tried to access the website on my phone and on my browser, and they're both working fine.
Okay, so a point of information. Thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
and actually, sorry, Chairman, if you'll indulge me, just Councillor Cole, I'd like to be involved in that as well going forward. Thanks, group.
Very good.
There we go. All the volunteers. Right, let me move on to item 9. Appointment of task groups. So we have a task and finish group at OSMC set up to look at fees and charges. And you have here on pages 123 to 125, the suggested detailed terms of reference. I'd like those agreed tonight. Are there any comments on those, Councillor Brooks?
You may find I'm not able to support being in agreement of them, but let's see how we do. I'm a bit surprised we haven't got cover pages on this item. On page 123, we go straight into the review rationale, but I'm uncomfortable. You might be too, if I describe a scenario. Everything I look and read here is this is about increasing fees, broadening them out, looking at things we don't charge for, and generally, at a time of a cost of living crisis, this could send a message saying we're going to try and find a lot more money to take from our residents. And if I were quite a canny journalist, I'd have a headline in next week's Newbury Weekly News saying council intends to increase fees across the board. So I'm very, very uncomfortable with the actual tenor of this report, because, Chairman, within it we say we'll look at other authorities and what they charge, and if they charge considerably less than us, we look like we've already set our stall out and said we're only looking to charge more, we're not looking to charge less. And I think that's hampering and harnessing us into a framework for these terms of reference that takes us only one direction, and I'm very uncomfortable with that. And I don't want to play politics, but a journalist may do so. And I'm therefore not prepared to actually take it and vote for it in its present form. I'd like it softened so that there is a broader expectation that we're looking at these fees and charges. We're looking at things we might charge for that we don't charge now. We're looking to compare them and benchmark them against other authorities. But this word increase, well, you know, it's in there as if that's why we're doing it. And that's not why I want to be involved in doing it. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Abbs, but first of all, Councillor Linden as chairman of that task and finish group.
Yes, Chairman. I wanted to raise some other issues.
Can we deal with this one first?
Okay. I'm open-minded if, you know, we need to say whether some charges need to be increased and some, you know, whether they've got to be reduced or not, if there's a valid reason for it. I know cost of living is going to be a real problem, and I think we've got to be very careful how we do things. And it is, whatever we do, we have to be sensitive in terms of what we're saying. And I know government ministers are, so I do get Councillor Brooks' point on that. So there might be cases where if we do find ourselves out of kilter, that we may not need to recommend vast increases in fees and charges. But there may be some that could be too low. I don't know. I mean, the financial situation could be tight for us, depending on what the government plan to do. And we still need to provide very urgent services in terms of the allocation we get at Christmas. So I can't really make more of a comment because we haven't actually examined it yet. We've just done the terms of reference. Chairman, I'm sorry to be so vague.
Okay, let me just take Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, I was going to try and help in that. If I saw the word value in there, I'd be a lot happier. You know, if they review the existing fees and charges, say this, provide, et cetera, and then something to do with looking at the value of the services provided. That allows us some largesse one way or the other.
Yeah, I must say, from the chair's point of view, I did not regard this as an exercise in how do we get more money. Okay, I accept when I look at some of the wording on this, particularly the first paragraph, I can see where the interpretation comes out. I would like to make a proposal, therefore, and suggest that maybe Councillor Abbs can think of where he can put the value statement in while I'm doing it. I would like that first paragraph to end after West Berkshire Council Services, full stop. Yeah. Okay.
I'll be very happy with that, Chair.
Where would you want to put something in value? Because I think that's a
yeah. I was
that was the essence of this review.
And then the words just need to reflect what we intend. For me, I'm looking at. I keep coming back to part 2 and that block there, leisure strategy, fees and charge, and review the existing and so on, and where it goes to charge for additional services to ensure value of the services that are required to be delivered in the new leisure strategy.
Put value in there. Okay. Okay. Can we, Councillor Brooks?
Your suggestion was very helpful. Thank you. If you turn the page 124, we come back to the task and finish group will, part 1, consider opportunities for new and increased fees and charges.
Yep.
We're back to it again. Part 2, required to charge for additional services. May be sensible or not, as the case may be. You know, it's still in the essence of the body, and I'd like to see it softened throughout, but your suggestion was very helpful along the way of that. I just don't want the devil in the detail to throw us off kilter when we get to the task group itself, please.
Can I make a request that rather than try and do this wordsmith on the fly here with all of us, that you leave this to me, and I will have a consultation with the Vice Chairman, and we'll get these T's and C's. More, unless there's anything.
No,
unless there's anything else.
What do you want to agree tonight, then, sir? Because I think what you're doing is quite rightly, and I thank you for it, taking it offline, bringing it back. So we're not actually agreeing it tonight then.
Well, I would like to have the I would like to have the permission of OSMC to allow myself and the vice chairman to actually do a bit of wordsmithing in this, unless somebody else has got an issue about.
I think it may need to be, the OSMC may wish to delegate it to an officer in consultation with the chairman and vice chairman. I think so that you have an officer formally making the decision rather than.
That's fine.
The chairman.
So that officer.
I think just in terms of where that decision, but in effect, it will be.
I'd like the commission members to see it before it's signed off.
Well, the next commission is not going to be until.
So I mean, by email, I'd like to see your revised versions.
Yeah, Chairman, I believe that we have to see the revised version.
Well, that is likely to then have create an email storm that's going to go back and forward, and because you'll have one opinion, somebody else have another opinion, and somebody's got to manage it.
Well, if I turn up at the first one, so I'm nominated as a member of this, and find that I can't support the terms of reference, it's a problem. I think what I'll do, I'll back off and look for your sagacity and your sagacity to get together and hopefully get a good outcome. How about that?
That's what I was asking for.
All right.
And I think the proper way, as I've been referred to by the monitoring officer, is we've got to delegate delegate that to an officer.
You've got the thrust of what I'm saying.
The vice chairman and chairman. Yeah.
You've got the thrust of what I'm saying. Thank you, Chairman.
We do. I understand.
Chairman, just for my, sorry, have I missed something? I'm not quite clear what, in terms of, because the wording increase is smattered throughout this.
Yes.
What was the original intention of this?
Was to review fees and charges, period.
I mean, the word, just, I mean, obviously you're going to address it, but where it says looking for additional revenue streams, I think it says somewhere. Actively.
There's nothing wrong with looking for additional revenue streams if they're valid.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with that. And in this day and age, we're all looking for increased revenue to do the services we want to do. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, I think I like Councillor Ab's comment about value. I think we've got to look at that.
It is actually in number F of that it does talk about value for money.
Where was that one?
It says, what do residents, service users think about current fees and charges in terms of their affordability and value for money?
Yeah. But look, if you're happy, we'll do this and we'll get this moving, and we'll agree that. I've got several hands flicking at me here. Monitoring officer first, please.
I was just going in answer to Councillor Rolls's question. I did pull up the original report that went to OSMC in January. And that did, that was approved, and that did, in effect, suggest a review in the following areas. And it was new proposals on planning income, leisure strategy and fees income arising from this, and other opportunities for commercial charging in the Place Directorate. So I think that there was probably a leaning towards that. I think members can broaden that as appropriate, given where the current economic climate is.
I think understand that, if there is an opportunity somewhere.
I think the original intention is probably reflected in what has been presented, and clearly members wish to amend that.
Okay, Councillor Brooks.
Sorry, no. I know there isn't the right introduction to this report, and the review rationale says at its meeting on the 25th of January 2022, OSMC agreed to set up a task and finish group and the potential to increase levels of income. You've taken that out, but the monitoring officer is just, why is that in there if it wasn't in what we'd agreed in January? Now, Chairman, we've made good progress, and thank you for that, but I just think the report could be much better. And if we're broadening the service out, if there's more that we should be charging for, I'm not against that. But I don't want to, I don't want to do Councillor Ross McKinnon's budget for him. He'll be rubbing his hands with glee saying, OSMC are going to find me a load more money.
Well, we actually are trying to help Ross McKinnon on this budget, because that was the whole point of looking at these fees and charges. We're trying to be, if you know, one of the tenets of one of the things we're trying to do in OSMC is to be a little bit proactive. And this is basically next year's fees and charges that we're trying to look at.
Which may be less. Thank you.
Which may be less in certain places, it may be more. And hopefully they're all regarded by all members and the members of the public as good value for money for the services. I would want one more time make sure I've got unanimity, if not unanimity, a majority, that we defer the precise wording of this terms of reference to Officer Gordon Oliver in consultation with myself as chairman and Councillor Abbs as vice chairman.
I'm happy to propose that.
Okay. Seconded. We're all agreed. Yes. Any abstention? Okay, good. That's it. Yes.
Yeah, so
So you've got something else to talk about on
yes,
this one.
yeah, there's two things. One is the timescale to be considered and start and finish. So that needs to be looked at with your consultation. And the second one is on the witnesses. We've got a fair amount of officers. I just think that in terms of the executive, Joseph Holmes would be useful as a witness, as he's the our head of finance and he's the service director for resources. And I think he is a valuable name to put on as a witness.
Thank you. What I will do, as you're the chairman, part of the consultation, I'll have a word with you. Make sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Good. Where are we? Right, back to again to item 10. Task and finish group updates. Councillor, anything else? We've just done them, haven't we? So we'll move on to item 11. Health and scrutiny update. Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. We had a special meeting of the Health Scrutiny Committee yesterday. That was to obtain an update on the status and activities of the redevelopment programme and creation of a joint Health Scrutiny Committee in respect of the Royal Berkshire Hospital redevelopment. We also consider Councillor Macro's motion regarding the Royal Berkshire Hospital redevelopment, which was brought to full council on the 17th of March. And officers' recommendations were rejected on that, so it will actually go back to full council. We also received an update on the Royal Berkshire Foundation Trust strategy refresh, and it was very pleasing to see that in attendance was Alison Foster, who was the programme director building Berkshire Together Hospital redevelopment, and we were also joined by Andrew Stratham, who's the director of strategy at the Royal Berkshire NHS Foundation Trust, Sally Moore, who's the head of comms and engagement, and Tom Broadfoot, who's a comms and engagement officer. So we had a good debate, and I felt it was a very good meeting. There is one thing I'd just like to mention. There has been some press coverage around a potential site for the Royal Berkshire Hospital, which was a comment by one councillor, and I'd just like to say it's not the council's position of where that we would recommend a site for the new hospital. So I just wanted to make members aware of that. Our next meeting is on the 14th of June, and obviously all the papers and the agenda will be released nearer the time. Does anybody have any questions? Pardon? What did you say?
Oh.
Anybody have any questions? I'd like to be very all-inclusive.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yes. Been on my chairman training. Thank you.
There's no question. No question. I did have a word with Councillor Coleman before the meeting, Rolls before the meeting started, because I don't know if you noticed the BBC South last night. It looked as if West Berkshire Council had proposed that the new hospital should be up on the showgrounds, and clearly there was the press picked up.
I just like to say, having spoken
a mixed message.
The board this morning of Newbury Showground, that is not the case, and it's not the council's position. Thank you.
Okay, right, fine. That's that one. Next item is the forward plan, pages 131 to 141. Councillor Brooks.
I was very pleased to see this. Within our group, we were wondering where it had gone. We hadn't seen an executive forward plan for some time. We were told it wasn't being done in its previous form. I'm glad to see this. I'd like some assurance that it's going to now be kept up to date and regularly distributed. so that all members are aware of what's upcoming. I'm not sure why it seemed to fall down a crack. Perhaps we just missed a trick. Could I, through you, ask the monitoring officer about that, please?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so I think that the forward plan hasn't ever stopped being produced. We're legally obliged to produce the forward plan. I think the format clearly did change, and I think that was around kind of December, January time, I'm going to suggest. I think the links for that, Sadie Owen issues now on a weekly basis, an update to members. And I think the links to the forward plan are in that. If they're not, I will ask Sadie to include them so that all members can just go to that weekly update, and there you can click into the forward plan and all of that detail.
That's excellent. Our group support executive did not seem to be able to find it. So I'll take that offline because she came back and said, well, it's not being done anymore. Not good. So some miscommunication, I think.
Yeah.
Indeed. No, I was not aware that there wasn't anything. In fact, I've had talks with the leader about deep aspects of the forward plan, that if we want to be more proactive, we've got to actually start doing a little bit longer horizons, don't we? Because by the time we get involved to be proactive and get the services involved, etc., and then it's got to go through the various boards that it's got to go through in the decision-making process. You really do need to have more than a 12-month view. Yeah. Tony.
Thank you. I think also in that plan, we need our major projects updates within that, significant projects, because some of our projects are over £1 million.
Such as?
Well, if there are delays or problems or generally and things that are going well and lessons to be learned. So I think
that's the performance monitoring stuff, isn't it, rather than the forward plan, isn't it?
Oh, right. Okay. So I might have got that wrong.
And we do get that, that's a quarterly thing. We're going to get that anyhow.
Okay, thanks. Because I'm new to this committee. Thanks, Sean.
Okay, so any other comments about the forward plan? Thank you.
Chairman, my hand is up. It's worth.
It's not on my screen, but go ahead.
Must have sort of closed it down then. That's what people do to me. 9th of June item for Cultural Heritage Strategy Delivery Plan. Refers to the Cultural Heritage Strategy Delivery Board. There's reference to ensure joined up working and delivery. Unfortunately, this board was cancelled before it got very far. I have seen that plan, can't pretend to have approved it or anything like that. As Anthony Pick from the Heritage Forum said before a recent forum meeting, as I shall explain then, the Cultural Heritage Strategy Delivery Board no longer exists, so it's not clear how and by whom the delivery plan is to be monitored. It could be a case for OSMC taking a look at culture and heritage. There have been some gaps. Maybe in next year's plan.
Okay, I'm interested as to, for what you've just said, why it's still on the plan.
There's a
I'm not sure
delivery plan.
Who can answer that question? Nigel? No?
There is a delivery plan. I have seen it. I should. I'm the heritage champion. But that board no longer exists.
Okay. Okay, but your point that you want to make is perhaps OSMC should be having a look at culture and heritage.
In the next
with
year.
a full program right out to the end of this particular financial year, but we got to sit down in about 3-4 months' time and have a look beyond that, and that will be the vice chairman, myself, and so we can take suggestions as to what that should be. Noted. Thank you. Put that as an action down, Gordon, please. Thank you.
Apologies. I have just taken the opportunity to check in the member weekly update, and the link to the forward plan isn't in fact in there. So I will ask that be added to that. I did, however, also just quickly Google West Berkshire Council forward plan, and I'm taken straight into the website. So I will send Councillor Brooks a link to that immediately and ask that go to all members with the weekly update now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So, okay. We'll then move on to the final item, which is the OSMC work program. I had two small amendments, which I had checked off with the new vice chairman. And basically, it's the task groups, the customer journey and the fees and charges. They were originally tried to be scheduled for September. We've moved them to into November. And there's a little bit of movement and slippage then from November out into March. I think the LEP moved from one to the other. That's it. It's basically for your information at this point in time. Anybody, any comments on it or anything? No. Okay.
If I may, Chair. Yeah, Thames Water Activities, item 4. I see we have most of the relevant parties there. I think I'm interested. There's a certain to do with sewage treatment and Thames Water and so on and so forth. And I'm assuming it's the same thing. But I'd like to get a real view on the technologies that they're going to be. Yeah, so their investment plan, yes, but what technologies are you going to be bringing forward to
They have, Thames Water have confirmed their attendance at the September meeting.
But if we can give them some heads up that really like them to go into, how are you going to solve discharges into the rivers, and you can get some real detail out of them, because if they come along blinded, I'll be asking them lots of questions and that will be a little bit unfair. So
yeah, I think that's why don't we you put the questions down and we'll send them off.
All members have been.
All members can do that.
All members have been contacted to ask for their thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, that's all business has now been completed. Thank you very much. Can I ask all panelists to remain on the virtual meeting room, not to leave until the Zoom host is confirmed that the meeting is no longer being live streamed.